All right, off the top of the show, I promised you a super depressing teach. If you've been watching all week, you know that I've been dealing with things that I don't understand about God at all. And in fact, I went to the internet to get these questions. I just put the question out there on my social media feed, said, let me know what it is that you don't understand about God at all. And so the questions we're dealing with this week came from your replies. So today's is a doozy, and I apologize in advance. I'll do the best I can in the 3 minutes and 45 seconds remaining to me. Here's the question. Why does a good God let horrific things like rape, child abuse, and genocide happen? In fact, if you stay tuned tomorrow, I will literally address the question of genocide as rooted in Deuteronomy chapter 9. But for today, let's dig into this one a little bit. The way I deal with this question is I go back to the rock. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made by Him or through Him, and without Him nothing was made that was made. In Him was light, and that light was the life of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Man, I feel like we could go to church. That's out of John 1. This is one of the great promises, one of the great archetypal passages in all of Scripture. We see here that God is the source. So the first thing you have to do when you come to these kind of questions is place your hand over your mouth. Literally, I would say, I need to shut up. I need to say, I don't understand, and I don't need to understand. If God is, in fact, the source, He is the one who ultimately has all of the answers. And He's playing the long game here, right? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. We're talking about an all-powerful God who has been around for a very long time. He's going to sew up the answers to these questions in the context of the long game. So what you may not understand this month, you may not understand next year. And you all know that you've dealt with situations that do work themselves out in the course of months and sometimes years. Time does heal all wounds in some sense. But there are some questions that are not going to be answered until we awaken in His likeness, until we're all changed at the last trumpet. Now, the other thing I want to say about this, why, God, do you allow all these things to happen? I want to give a shout out to my sweet and brilliant wife, who is on a bit of a leftist literature tear these days. And she was reading The Irresistible Revolution by Shane Claiborne. And so we're lying there in bed at night going to sleep, and she reads me snippets. And she read me a snippet from that book, The Irresistible Revolution, which is what we need here in answering this question. We need to completely shift and change our perspective. And he says in that book that it's not God who rapes, it's not God who kills, it's not God who commits acts of genocide. Ever since the fall, which is outlined in the famous Genesis chapter 3, who is the one committing these heinous acts? It is you and it is me. And so next time we feel inclined to ask that big question, it's natural to ask that question of God, but we need to remember as Christians that we are ultimately the ones who are responsible for doing these things, for committing these acts. So why God? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. Now listen to this last part. He is the one who made all things, and without Him nothing was made that was made. All of this needs to be encapsulated, if I had a red marker it'd be better, in a great big heart. Okay? If God is in fact the one who made all things, every time you are offended by a heinous act, by an act of murder, by an act of rape, by an act of genocide, you get that sense of horror, that sense of revulsion. Imagine the sense of horror and revulsion that the master maker has when he sees His creation, His creatures, committing these acts against His creation and against His creatures. Your outrage is doubled and redoubled and redoubled and redoubled again to the size of the master maker Himself who framed all things. So this is why when you come to questions of the wrath of God, when you ask, how could God be angry at sin? Well, this question leads us to a pretty firm answer. And as I said right off the top, it forces us to place our hands quickly over our mouth so that we can point to Him.